Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Okay, cool. Well, morning. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Dr. Aljowaily. I'm the founder and CEO of Creative Development. We're a Pan-African advocacy and creative firm. And basically what we do is we tell really powerful, dope stories about the African continent. And not just the Africa that we want, but the Africa that we deserve. So we do this through digital storytelling, creative storytelling, visual storytelling, research, and advocacy across the African continent, whereby we're really trying to shape the narratives that shape Africa, whether this be through climate, whether this be through gender, whether this be through democracy, health, jobs, finance, and tell the story in a way that shapes beliefs, but also change minds around what's possible. So, with that being said, I am African, and we really do make everything quite cool. So, before we get into a little bit of a debate and a discussion around what this actually means as we think about the climate and the climate story and how we can think about different perspectives and approaches of how to bring that in, I want to play you guys a little video. Let's go ahead.
As we fight for Africa's plight, side by side, no hogging of the light. Travel the world to speak on opportunities with a bench as a podium, from delegates to communities, so delicately telling stories of Africa like the sweetest lullaby. The We Are campaign set Africa ablaze, but you never see who's in the back, pulling the wires, setting the scene, the ones who were never seen. Round of applause to our stars in the center stage, the communities that will never make your front page, but we're there in the beginning and end and in between. Putting the work in, the rejection plenty, our vision could never be seen in 2020, but it was. And that's why you applaud and you were moved. We did it. You saw it. It was all love when we were finally winning. Round of applause as the crowd roars as we take a bow. Thank you for seeing us.
I would love to invite my panelists who will be joining us for a really interactive discussion. But before I invite them up, I want to set some ground rules. Honestly, we hate panels. We just had to do it to, be a part of South by Southwest, so we agreed to it. But this is going to be a discussion. This panel is only kicking us off into what I hope is a really grounded, really honest conversation about where we are in telling the story, how we tell the story well, that actually reflects the voices of those who do not get to enter spaces like this, right? So, with that said, I would love to invite Eric Myers. Yeah, take a seat. Filmmaker, film director, DOP of over 13 years, who has experience creating emotionally resonant and visually striking stories across film, music, and brand content. I would love to invite Monique Laws. Musician, TV presenter, evangelist, and founder of Rainchild Foundation to empower young women and youth and those facing mental health and social challenges. And finally, I would love to invite up Hayat Aljowaily, creative producer and filmmaker who explores the intersection between film and social changes, including climate justice, identity, and migration, who's worked on a number of cool projects, particularly for creative development, but as well as Marvel, and the list goes on. And Hayat, I'm so sorry for butchering your surname. We'll discuss this later. But before we start with the panel, I'd love to get a sense within the room, because the conversation, I think, kind of needs to start here. How many people in this room, by show of hands, follows Thames on social media? Just raise them up so I can. Okay, some unexpected hands went up there. Okay, great. How many people in this room are Man U fans? Like diehard? One person? You can leave if you'd like. Okay, a little bit more serious. How many people, and we can be honest, right? How many people have attended more rooftop parties than community cleanups? All right. How many people in this room know about the recent floods that happened in Nigeria, a few weeks back, that killed over 200 people? And for the people who have their hands up, can you just raise your hands? Can you keep your hands raised? For the people in your life, the people around you, so this is not about you. If they were to hear this story of the 200 people that have been killed, would they look at that and probably empathize, sympathize? It's really sad, but probably think, honestly, there's nothing I can do about it, and it really has nothing to do with me. If that is the case, can you just keep your hands raised? Cool. And with that said, thank you, Juan, so much for your honesty. I think this is a really good way, for me at least, to kind of ground the conversation in terms of what are we talking about here as it relates to climate, and how did we get here, right? And how can we learn? So we don't have climate activists, and I know this is kind of a weird thing for spaces like this. These are not climate activists that you'll be speaking to. These are storytellers. These are narrative architects who are going to be speaking to us and giving us a few insights in terms of how do you get people to care? And not just care, but care enough to take the next step. Whether it is unfollowing someone or sending a video, whether it is stopping to buy a particular product, whether it is to change your mind on a vote, how do you get people to care? So this is a question for the entire panel to kind of kick us off. We all know that facts don't change minds, it doesn't change beliefs. Culture does. I'd love to know what that means to you. Eric, if you want to kick us off.
Hello, everyone. I think culture for me shapes everything, it shapes humanity. Like for me, I shoot a lot of music videos, and when I think about my treatments, I'm thinking about how is this going to connect with the audience, basically. And so the dances that we include, the locations, we have it's all part of storytelling, Like we need people, like culture is how we connect with people. So I think what it means to me is it's a form of identity, basically. It shapes everything we do, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a form of identity. Monique, what does culture in this sense mean to you?
Hi, everybody. I agree with Eric. I feel like, culture is our foundations. It's what we're born into. And I believe that it influences us so massively. It shapes our world. It shapes our future. My background being music, similar to Iggy when we're looking at Eric, similar to when we're looking at video treatments and how do we get this to connect with the audience. We put essentially our soul into it. We put relatability into it. So I think that culture is you know, it's a massive impact on everything we do. So, you know, obviously with this conversation that we're having, we need to be mindful of that. Culture is everything.
100%. 100%. Hayat?
I think that word relatability is really where I would hone down on, because I think the issue with facts is that they can feel very distant. If you haven't lived through something and you just read a statement, X amount of people died in this flood, or this village was wiped out by a glacier melting. If you haven't had that lived experience, it just feels very distant. It's just a bunch of words on paper or numbers. But I think when we're telling stories, whether it's through music or film or program, like community building, all of these things allow us to then relate to that experience, even if we haven't gone through it ourselves. Because when you're listening to a song or watching a film, even if you haven't been through that experience, you're going to be able to relate to the feeling and the emotion that the character, whether it's a real person or a fictional one, is going through. And that, I think, is where the power of storytelling comes in, which is then you're able to relate to that person or that community and feel, okay, if this is how they felt, I felt that way before, it's not a good feeling, and I want to do something about it.
Hayat, I'd love to stay with you a little bit, right? And just if you, yeah, surprise, surprise. If you can expand on this idea a little bit more, you know, basically, why are we getting it wrong in the climate story? Everything that you've just spoken to in terms of, we know that this is an issue, right? It affects all of us, it touches all of us. Why is this not being reflected within the climate story, and what should we actually be doing to be able to bring these dimensions in?
I'd say it's divided in, I mean, what we're doing wrong is maybe divided into two things from my point of view. The first one being that even though there's been a lot of efforts recently to make the climate story less doomy and less scary, it's still the way that we're looking at it, especially in the news. I mean, I saw a video a few days ago of some glacier in Switzerland melting and a whole village being wiped away, and then all of a sudden it feels really scary, and you kind of just want to ignore it, because to actually acknowledge it would just be a weight on our shoulders all the time. But in my work on climate, especially with creative development, what I've realized is that working on climate is actually also working with a lot of hope and working with a lot of closeness and community. So we've had a lot of great experiences, you know, in Lagos, in Cairo, and doing community events where we're surrounded by a lot of joy, actually, and a lot of hope and a lot of imagination. Because what it comes down to, and I don't know if some of you have seen, Greta Thunberg is now on a flotilla going to Gaza. And in an interview a few days ago, she said that people assume that when you are working on climate, you want to save nature, but you also want to save people. Absolutely. And I think when we look at it from that perspective, and just remember that it's all about people. It's about coming together. It's about bringing back some of the rituals and, you know, the closeness to our nature and to our community that we've historically and had. That's where the core of it is. And if we shift the focus to that, all of a sudden it feels a lot less scary, and more people might want to get involved. And I think that leads to the second point, which is that I think climate in some communities is cool now, and there's a lot of events that are branded as climate this, climate that, and that's really important. And I think it brings in the people who really care and who've already made this their life's mission. But if we want to reach out to further communities, we just got to put the climate in all the things that you were mentioning earlier. So if it's a music festival, a film festival, it should just seep into the programming naturally, and people shouldn't be feeling like they're going out of their way to get in touch with these topics. And in Cairo, for example, there's been quite a few great initiatives recently. There's a festival called From Waste to Good Taste. So it's somewhere there in the title, but not really. And it's about fashion and upcycling. And you show up, and it's just a really cool event. People want to show up because they have these huge sculptures made of waste, and then you go in, and then there's workshops and this and that, and then you end up spending the whole day there, and you've learned a lot about the effects of fashion on climate, etc., without having initially kind of signed up for that. And I think that subversiveness is is where the future of climate storytelling is.
100%. That's absolutely what we did here with even just the title of this event. So I completely agree with you. And I think, Monique, if I can almost take it, to you in terms of the entry points, right? We know that faith spaces are probably some of the most influential spaces as it relates to Africans and Africa. But it seems like, a Sunday service at church, I'm not sure I'm hearing about climate. I'm definitely hearing about relationships, and then, the next relationship series, and I think this is kind of across the board when we're thinking about, what are we speaking about within faith spaces, and why do we feel kind of uncomfortable to engage on something so important? And there's influence, there is credibility there. You have access to people week in, week out. Why aren't we seeing this show up, and what role should faith spaces and faith leaders play?
I absolutely agree with you. I do believe that the faith spaces is where we should be having these conversations. From my point of reference as a woman of God, the Bible says that in Genesis 1:26, God gave man dominion over the earth and everything in it. So for me, it's more than a conversation, it's a prophetic mandate. It's a requirement to look after the earth. And I feel like, when it comes to spiritual leaders, they can slightly miss the teachings of that. I understand that, they have a big commitment to the people. But when it comes to climate, I believe it's one and the same. Just how we're required to take care of our bodies. What we're putting into our bodies is affecting us. What we're putting into the earth is affecting us. So half of us have microplastics in our body because we're just throwing our, waste wherever. And I believe that, any religion that, that you serve, when you're meeting and you're gathering, you already have the infrastructure. You have the people. So why are we not organizing the people to do something? And I feel like you said something very important. A lot of fear is being spread, but where's the hope? It doesn't have to be, if we don't do this, this is going to happen. It could be. How would it be? What are the possibilities if we had clean earth? I'll give you an example. During COVID, when it was locked down because nobody left their house, barely any cars on the road, I heard the birds chirping like never before. The skies even seemed clearer. And I actually raised the conversation within my family. I was like, have you noticed? There's a calm. It was almost like a cleansing and a renewal. So now what can we do, within our religion and our infrastructures? Look at how we throw away our waste. Look at what we're using when we're drinking our water, what are we using? Cardboard, are we using glass? Let's be conscious of what we're doing. It's not if you don't do it, then the earth depends on you. No, but each one teach one. We say in church, one will put 1,000 to flight. So if you do something, someone else will, and the chain will continue. Yeah. I also believe for the leaders, sometimes they're a bit hesitant because they don't want to offend. And my pastor said to me, if you can't change the opinions of people, then get them to change their opinion of you. So if they see you living out the example, naturally, gradually, they'll follow. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, I actually wanted to kind of follow up on something that you said in terms of what we're seeing with COVID and the conversations you were having with your family. I'm very interested around what is the conversation you begin to have with your mom, your grandma, who might not have the lexicon or the understanding that you do. Maybe they do. I'm not sure. But what is a conversation like that with the people in your world?
Yeah. To be honest, I used to think I was the black sheep because I'm always the one to, guys, have you noticed? And they'd be like, oh, here she goes again. And but it's exactly that. It's not, I've woken up this morning and I've decided that the whole house should be clean from head to toe. It's, guys, what do you think if, to provoke some thought, some feeling, get people to look at something that maybe they never even considered, or maybe they never, never thought of before. And that's how I would sort of, start the conversations. Grandmothers would be like, oh, well, it don't matter. I'm Jamaican, so that was my grandma. Oh, it don't matter. But it's like, but Gran, how about? It's always the how about. We're taught to speak with love as believers. So in anything you're doing, you just approach it with love first. Again, it's not about fear. It's about hope. It's about positive change. A lot of us here, we have family, we have little ones. It's a responsibility for us to teach them the right way, because then what happens to their future? Again, that comes from love, because we're thinking about others, So I just believe that approach everything with love when you're having the conversations with your family members, and be patient. They might not get it straight away, but again, you set the example. You show them. My mum, very, very stubborn. Very, very, very stubborn. And, we have our differences naturally. And when you can see something's better for someone, you can't just shove it down their throat. You just invite them to the party.
Yeah.
And hope that they'll come. Keep inviting.
Yeah.
Don't stop. Just keep inviting. Because essentially, it's for the best. It's for the good. Of everybody.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Eric, I would love for you to kind of speak to the idea, or not the idea, essentially like the phenomenons that we've seen with adolescents, right? Everyone's watching it. Everyone has some kind of comment, right? Whether it's adolescents, whether it's Barbie, whether it's Parasite, these cultural phenomenons that have been able to spark conversation, uncomfortable conversations, get people involved, get young people involved. Why haven't we really seen anything like this happen, at least within the climate space? And how can we begin to see or create these kind of cultural revolutions through art and creativity with climate?
I'll speak personally. I think when it comes to the topic of climate, I feel like for a long time I always felt like it was somebody else's problem to fix. I'd never felt like I had a role to play in, excuse me, I never felt like I had a role to play in solving it. And so when I heard about stories that came as a result of climate change, I'd read it and I'd just be, okay, cool. There's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
But it was only after I watched the David Attenborough documentary, I think about 5-6 years ago, and I don't know, it just kind of spoke to me, because now I have kids and I think about their future. I think about the kind of world I want them to grow up in.
Yeah.
And it's just become a lot more important to me to do my bit. And going to what you spoke about in regards to storytelling, and I think the reason why we haven't had a moment like that is because, like Hayat said, it's always about facts and figures, whereas I feel like we need to humanize the effects. We need to, this is affecting real people. So in filmmaking, I feel like we need to, sorry, let me gather my thoughts.
Take your time.
Yeah, so I feel like in filmmaking, the reason why we're having a moment like this is because we're not showing how this is affecting real people every day, And the moment we start humanizing these stories and the effects and the cause as well, and making it relatable, that's when it starts to connect with more people,
100%.
And it's just about being conscious about the role each and every one of us is playing in the bigger picture.
100%.
And and it just, when I started to shift my mindset, okay, cool, instead of putting it in this bin, I can put it in that bin. It's not all one bin, do you know what I mean? And education is a huge thing as well. I think when you start training the little kids from young about recycling, the effects of everything that we do, you know, because it all plays a part.
Yeah.
And it's a fight that we're all part of, you know. But yeah, it's all about intentionality and just having it in the back of your mind that this is a real thing, you know. And in regards to like writing scripts and writing stories, there's many ways that you can include the topic, the subject.
100%.
But if you're not thinking about it
100%.
and how to package it so that everyday people like you and me can resonate with it and relate to it, people are just going to see it and just keep scrolling. You know?
100%. And I think this is an amazing segue for us to kind of bring the conversation here, right? Climate change, the climate crisis is important. We've just started the whole session discussing the fact that 200 people just lost their lives. An entire town has been submerged. But I have to care about my job. I have to care about my kids. I have to care about climate. I have to care about gender-based violence. I have to care about finance reform. There's only so much capacity I have. And I'm on social media when I'm being bombarded with content constantly of people getting me to care about a whole bunch of things. How do we break through the noise? I'd love to open up the conversation. Does anyone want to kick us off? How do we break the noise? How do we begin to humanize and package? Yeah, thank you so much for turning on the light. How do we begin to humanize the story in a way that gets you to stop?
Hello. I feel like over the last 2 years, obviously everything that's happened in Gaza, I feel like compared to, say, 5 years ago where you heard it, you were just like, okay, yeah, keep it moving. But now we've seen people's stories, we've seen the proof, we've heard journalists on the road, like on the street and in the field, like in the country, just talking about their experience and just showing us and actually making it feel a lot more human. Yeah. And I feel like it's made people empathise in a way that they didn't before, where now, sorry, my alarm's going off. Anyway, water alarm. But yeah, I just feel like there's a connection, and it's really just made us understand humanity in a way that people probably haven't in a while. Like even when you see with, say, Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, where it was like people were like, okay, I'm just going to do Black Square and keep it moving. I feel like people now are willingly trying to engage. You look at, say, Just Stop Oil, where they've been throwing paint over like Van Gogh paintings, and it's gotten people angry. Yeah, people go like, oh, but have they ruined their causes? But you're talking about it. Think about all the other climate discussions from years behind. Do you remember any of them? You remember Extinction Rebellion taking over London. You remember these people throwing paint, but you hear people talk about like, oh, but what about these people who like made this giant burning panda? And it's like, I don't remember that. You don't remember that, but I remember this. It's gotten you mad. It's gotten the conversation going. And like now, Just Stop Oil kind of like put themselves aside and said like, we've done our job. We're going to move on. But just like getting people to actually connect to it and actually see this humanity as opposed to, like you said, facts that are just cold and distant has been quite an interesting shift. And I feel like now it's become a lot more emotive and vibrant in a sense.
I saw another. Hi, Jamie. There's a mic.
Hi, Akito, and thank you for this. So I think alongside the specific stories and the inspiring specific stories and narratives, what's very important, I think, is in particular the point that has been made about whether they speak into shared values. So, for example, the example was given of faith, right? And so, as you know, I've done lots of campaigns and helped build movements on debt cancellation, HIV/AIDS, and food security, in partnerships with people in Africa over 30 years. 20 years ago, those campaigns were much easier and movements were much easier to build because there were international progressive faith movements that were internationalist and local. So you could go to your church in Hackney or Shoreditch and the same denomination might exist in northern Nigeria, well, maybe not northern Nigeria, but somewhere in Nigeria. Or Kenya, and there would be solidarity between those people based on a common set of values. Now, I'm not asking or advocating that specific faith, but it was internationalist systems of faith. Another internationalist network was trade unions and labor movements. Our campaigns on anti-apartheid, our campaigns on HIV/AIDS, Jubilee debt cancellation, all were predicated on those internationalist and solidaristic movements. Then inspiring specific stories helped catch fire to those underlying embedded values. I think one of the problems we're facing at the moment is there has been an erosion of those shared internationalist networks.
Yeah.
And so it's much harder now for someone from, say, the global north, especially if they happen to be white or middle-aged and middle-class male, to be in solidarity with someone in Africa so they're perceived not to have anything in common. Whereas, in fact, once upon a time, by being a member of a trade union or by being a person in progressive faith, they would have seen it as their duty, and it would be understood that we'd be part of one global community. It might be that that modern community is Arsenal rather than Man United, or are passionate about football, or cricket, or rugby, or music. But we need to do everything we can to rebuild those internationalist, values-laden, preconceived places where people are coming from so that the stories can set fire to something that's already there. If we don't have those underlying shared values, I think the stories might land on less fertile ground. So we need both. I'm not arguing against the specifics you're describing here, but I think we need desperately to find both. If the stories can help those, latent and nascent internationalist networks re-find themselves, then we're on something really special and they can take off again. And I'd love to be part of this conversation going forward.
100%.
We did a panel on this, by the way, at the beginning of the week, a call to action for creators and culture. It was exactly on this subject, and it'd be great to keep talking about this.
100%.
Great.
So, there's a mic here. There's a...
Thanks for this conversation. I think as one that lives and works on the continent, I really wanted to be here, and I like what the other two speakers have mentioned now. I think when we look at art or creatives, sometimes I feel like the gap is we just make an inspiring story that touches lives, but it's not really targeted. Because Africa is not just like any other continent. We're very heterogeneous, and we have different stratas of power. So we have people who can do something. We have people who can influence, like the Thames. And then we have people that they know that this is bad, but they can't do anything about it. When you start talking about glass or used carton, some cannot even afford anything like this. So what I see is that sometimes the storytelling carries the social media rankings, but it's not at the table of who can take action. So if we're starting to maybe make stories that speaks to, let's say we're speaking to the governors of states, we're speaking to agencies, we're saying we are making this video or we're making this artistic work for this group of people so that they can do something about it. Because if we continue speaking to our emotions, because Africans are deeply rooted in culture, they will resonate with it, but they don't have the willpower. So I'm thinking of how we're going to close the gap between empathy and power to act. And we can only do that if we speak to the people in the system that have the power to take action. And I know sometimes they won't listen because it's Africa, but it's good that we start building that out in bits, in even the art that we're talking about. It could be as little as influencing an influencer, a Thames, a Two-Face, to do something that will make their followers follow suit as well. But if we keep on just saying, I have a YouTube page and I'm putting up stories, people will like it, but they won't do anything because they don't have the power to do anything. People typing at the back of TikTok in Africa don't have the power to really make a change, even in their families, before they get it. So I just feel like we need to close that gap in terms of power and influence.
I think you make such a good point. And I want to follow up on your question, on your response back into the audience. Altruistic stories, empathetic stories, let's use culture, great. How do we actually begin to use these things to talk to power in a real way? to talk to people who are sitting and right now feel like the decision sits as whether my economies can grow and my country can develop, or I'm signing on to another treaty. I want my country to develop, right? How do we begin to tell stories? I see a hand at the back that actually...
Hi, thank you. I was prepared for the first question, but I think
You can come back.
this second question has a lot to do with what I'm going to say. So thank you so much for this. I think this is one of the sessions that the most interesting and, in this program. I'm from the Amazon region, and I work with communities there, indigenous riverside communities, and I'm very much involved in the COP30 in Belém. I don't know if you heard about it's going to be in the Amazon region this year. But I wanted to talk about these human stories. I think there are two things if you wanted to talk to power. And I've been facing a lot of challenge because I think, one, there is the intersectionality of those subjects. People, and then this is my experience in Europe when I try to talk about climate change in my region, I think maybe in Africa would be the same, is people try to, especially international organizations that have been working climate and activist movements that is trying to separate nature from people. So what you said about this emotional and that give face to people is very important, because people try to separate the rainforest from the problems that we have in the urban areas in the Amazon region, for example. And all these problems that are interconnected. So if you're talking about the lack of sanitation, the fact that there is a lot of problems in terms of gender, young people not going to schools. This is related to the fact that how we can guarantee a future to these people if we're not talking about this intersectional thing. How we can protect the forest without protecting the people that live in the forest. And it's not just about one community, one specific community, but it's about everyone that is part of this community. Because if you don't give all the opportunities for young people in Africa or in the Amazon region, they're going to work in an illegal mining company. And that's what a lot of people in Europe, especially those that work in nature, they don't understand this. You cannot separate these subjects. You have to start to intersectional to talk about this in order to take the message. The other things about the funding, the money, how you fund these stories. Most of the time when I try to sell these stories, sell in a sense that pitching these stories, pitch about what is happening in COP30 now, for example. More part of the events that's going to happen there is going to be sponsored by mining companies in an event that's talking about climate change. But people don't want to, the people that have money, people that will be able to fund in these stories, they have their only rationale about what is to talk about those stories. Or you take a celebrity there, or it's not necessarily related to what they think about what is protecting the forest. So where is the money? Where is the funding? Where, to give a platform to these local voices to talk about the local solutions. Because there are a lot of solutions in these areas. Solutions that's about what is happening in South Africa. It doesn't work in Amapá, my state. But people don't want to talk about this here. They have in their mind what is the solutions for those people that comes from a very colonialist point of view, and they don't want to fund all the stories, And then I think it is also about the lack of money to fund in these stories, because otherwise we're not going to get to the international platform to tell these stories, and we're not going to talk to power.
Does anyone want to respond to that? Before I throw out my next question, just off the back of this, what is a good story then? Right now, the big narrative, I don't go to a single event, particularly within the development space, where they don't talk about Africans need a seat at the table. It's a great line. It's a played out line. Or Africa is disproportionately affected, least contributing. Everyone says that it's a part of the lexicon. We talk about things like intersectionality. My mom wouldn't understand a thing around. We've made it very hard to be in rooms like this just by virtue of the language that we use, right? I was at an event yesterday. We were having debates on whether recycling is important versus paper straws, and I was like, man, this is why we're going to lose every single time. So what is a big enough story? What is a big enough narrative? Everyone's talking about African resilience with everything that we're talking about, and self-reliance, particularly where we are right now within the geopolitics and the geopolitical space. What is a compelling story that actually engages people and starts building people movements? Please.
Hi, I'm not sure if it is a full-out story ready to be presented, but I always think we need to concentrate on the biggest idea as opposed to recycling versus whatever, because if we put our effort, let's put it into something meaningful. The situation is quite clear. If fossil fuels continue to be used, then whatever we do with recycling, it doesn't matter. Most of the African countries, they pay more on servicing the debt than on education, health, and climate. Whatever we do with recycling doesn't matter. What matters is where 89% of the people who care about the climate and the future for the future generation, they actually put their money in. Mm-hmm. Which banks continue exploration and burning fossil fuels. That's a bigger story that is not concentrated on. Mm-hmm. And the way how to do it, there are already some financial instruments, but it's more complex for the general public to discuss, where the debt servicing will not be paid in money back, but instead, African continent can move to renewables, bypassing the different stages that the Industrial Revolution kind of brought to other countries. Mm-hmm. But that's the way forward. Instead, fossil fuels are being embedded into Africa, mm-hmm. and people pay for that. And that's a bigger story. But how to tell it, I'm not a creative to tell. But I think we need to put our effort on telling a story that can make a difference versus recycling paper straws, whatever.
There's see a hand over there? There's a hand over here.
Excuse me.
Hi, thank you so much for this session, and I love the open dialogue. A documentary I watched recently was the cave rescue in Thailand, and when you talk about storytelling, for me that was just one of the most beautiful stories, because there was a horrible thing that happened to a small group in a soccer team of young kids, and it was so personal because it was a small group of young kids, and then there was this beautiful sense of camaraderie around the world where all these people came together, and there was engineers that were plugging the holes and trying to kind of fix the water flow. There were cave divers that had, medical skill sets that came from around the world to support these, kids get out of the cave. It was just a really beautiful sense of the world coming together to work on a common goal, and there was hope. And I think that's one of the themes that's so important when we do talk about these stories, is what's the action that's going to actually make a difference. Mm-hmm. And for people that feel helpless, I think having that clear message of this is what you can do to support is critical, because it gives people that hope of this is actually what's within my control in this situation, is I can donate and this is exactly where my money is going to. Mm-hmm. Or for someone that does have that very, very niche skill set of I'm a cave diver and I'm an anaesthetist, like this is my niche and this is how I can help make a difference. So I think stories that show people coming together and solving big problems as one is one aspect, and I think the second aspect is that hope and knowing exactly how you can make a difference and what's within your control in the situation. Otherwise it does feel helpless and it feels like there's nothing you can do, so having that clear action for me is really important in the story.
100%. Is that a hand? Yes. Can I?
Thank you. I was going to say, is this loud enough? Yeah. Cool. Obviously, the bigger picture is the end goal and what's important. Mm-hmm. But I kind of think, as mentioned, relatability and the kind of individual changes that people can make are often missed. So I was trying to think, like, in certain aspects, whether it be the narratives kind of presented or how things are phrased, for example, whether it be a white terrorist versus a black one. And you see that in the news last week in Anfield and everything as well. I was trying to think more localised sort of documentaries that can almost wake up certain people. For example, I don't buy Nestle products due to how they've been, and that's due to my dad. So it's a thing where, like we mentioned at the start, with culture and your upbringing, that's a very big influence on how you're going to treat things. Whereas when I'm at uni, the activism of like the Just Stop Oil and stuff like that, the conversations, rather than me coming into the room and very much being a positive thinker, I'll walk in and my flatmate will be like, "Oh, did you see the person that stopped the ambulance?" And then it's just got a negative spin. So it's very much like the consideration of how, and obviously we know the media is filled with propaganda and negativity, so it's almost like, where possible, to be mindful and have actual kind of consciousness about what you're consuming and what you're promoting, sharing. Like, yes, we've mentioned that it's all an individual thing, but at the same time, as you said, the 1 to 1,000, you do influence other people with what you share. Like, whether or not you subconsciously or consciously take it in, there is an end kind of subliminal result, which I think ends up leading slightly towards the bigger picture. Because whether or not you might mention recycling might not be the overall, of course, is education and how you kind of demonstrate like community kind of welfare and the positives that come with if you do this action. So on the storytelling element, it's very much, if you can flip it to these are the positive things around such a negative environment, then you're less likely to be closed off, because you see as to the positive impact and positive change that something can actually lead to. And then it is very much a decision maker's kind of place as well, which is the problem, because we kind of see how the rainforest is and everything like that. So unfortunately, we live in a rough world, but we do all have our own actions and ways in which we can help change it. It just depends on consciousness and kind of free will.
100%, that's right, 100%. Jamie, great.
Thanks. So are we having a sort of brainstorm here?
Yes,
Yeah,
we are.
okay. Because one thing that, well, look, first of all, as you know, we're working hard on the African Great Green Growth story. There's so much to be positive about there, and so many opportunities for people to make money and to make a massive difference. So it's overwhelmingly exciting. However, that story is not getting through. So here's a provocation. And this is bear with me on the nuance of this. So there is an archetype that needs addressing, right? And the archetype is of the starving African child, and that is the concern and the question. And in particular, then there's the white messiah with the starving African child, and then it gets very challenging. We do have right now a famine in Africa, probably more than one, and we have it in Sudan. And what would be extraordinary would be if this generation of African cultural and creative leaders, of course, we've got to figure out how to tell the optimistic story too, but addressed this particular challenge head on and said, we're going to force our leaders to pay attention to this, put in the diplomatic work, the financial work, the humanitarian work to deal with Sudan, and demand this be put on the global agenda in the way that other crises are, and Sudan is not. Why isn't it? And I say this because when non-African actors try and raise the issue, they're accused of the white messiah thing I mentioned. But African actors aren't raising it very much. So I think that the question of agency needs to be the social capital to address. You build your social capital on the international stage by addressing the really hard issues and not doing sort of the easy PR for the issues which naturally could draw positive attention. So I just think I'd say there's an imperative, but there's also an opportunity by actually squarely addressing the situation in Sudan and this generation of African cultural leaders and creatives focusing on that and trying to lead the world in solving this problem, lead their own leaders and the world in solving this problem. And then the kind of attention that would draw to that generation of creatives and cultural leaders could be then focused on so many other things that were of a more direct and positive nature. So I admit what I just said was complicated and a bit nuanced, but I think something like that needs to be attempted. Otherwise, we're a bit stuck. And by the way, of course, the situation in Sudan is partly caused by the climate crisis. It was one of the substantial reasons it occurred and unfolded.
100%. Anyone else wants to respond to that or wonder?
I actually just wanted to respond to the conversation we were just having prior around individual actions, and just make the point that everyone always thinks about individual actions in their personal life, and loads of people, I work in climate, loads of people are trying to work in climate, but don't realise that in their day-to-day jobs, that can be a climate job as well. And we spend so much of our lives at work, and we all have our individual skill sets. So I just wanted to say that everyone can put those skill sets towards the climate crisis in their job today. And so it's just an important thing to remember in your day-to-day lives, not just in your personal life. And the second thing was, when we're talking about content creation, we always talk about stories that are specifically about the climate. And we spoke earlier about titles that are about the climate, and sometimes that puts people off because they think, I'm not a climate person, or as we said, that's really negative. But I think what we need to do is integrate climate into everything, and that includes creative content. And I'm going to butcher this, but there's an index which is around, in films, how many times two women are speaking and they're not talking about a man. There's a similar index around how many times climate comes up, but just not in a climate film, just in a film. Someone talks about something like the weather's changed, or like they're recycling, or something a bit more interesting than that. But that's also extremely low. So I think when we're creating things, it doesn't have to be a climate story, just put climate into all of the stories, because it's relevant across our whole lives and it's relevant in our day-to-day.
100%. Was there another hand? I think I got everybody. Yep, sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Slightly off topic, but I know we're running out of time and I came to ask a specific question.
Go ahead.
So my name's Tomi. I work for a startup as the Chief Product Officer, and we're building solar cookware in Africa. Really to do with climate, and also more importantly as well to do with health, because we use a lot of fuel to cook and we use a lot of firewood, which is taking away the forest. My question is, there is a lot of people who are trying to change climate, trying to get Africa to understand climate change. But how do we get the end users, the households who use that stuff, and it affects their health, their children, the kids go to the forest, so gender-based violence, things like that, that we put our kids in that situation because we have no choice. How do we get them to understand the need for a product like this? Get them to understand that they're part of the climate story as the end user, and how can we convince them not to use firewood or other things that are a danger to them, but instead to use a safer alternative for them, but also for the environment? How do we tell that story?
Can I, does anyone, as we begin to close off, does anyone want to answer the question?
Yeah, I don't know, I think film is so powerful. It changes people's mindsets, it shapes people's mindsets, it can shape culture, perception, and I think that's an avenue that I don't think has been used enough. Because if you think about how big Nollywood is, for instance, and going to faith and religion and how much that's been pushed through film as well, I think a visual of the effects of their actions could help to drive that message home, But yeah, I just feel like film and storytelling is overlooked when it comes to pushing the message and getting people to understand the actual effects of their actions.
100%.
Yeah.
Can I jump in as well?
Please, go ahead.
I'm a big believer of collaboration. I feel like we need to be collaborating with the people that live it, the people that want to do something about it, and the people that can. I've grown up with this teaching of start with what's in your hands. I live in Ghana right now. And it's funny, your question is so specific to me because so where we live in Okosombo is right by the dam. And it's kind of a bit untapped. So right behind us, we have village people. So one morning you could wake up and someone's happily burning their rubbish, which is extremely toxic to everybody, and you can see, literally see the particles falling. Now, because they're village people, i.e. like really what you see, like just village, it's my duty now to speak to them. And if I say, do you know that this is harmful? They say, oh, so what should I do? Do you understand? So now I will be the connector between, okay, these are the people that could do something. Hello, we have a village of people here. We need rubbish collection. In fact, I will do it with you. But let's do something. So I would just say, when it comes to bridging the gap and connecting things, you have to be bold. You have to be courageous and start with what's in your hands. Really, you have to make impact. That's my addition.
We've run out of time. I'd love us to just close out with just very, very quick final words from each of you, just in terms of how do we get people to care enough to take the next step?
I mean, I'm going to maybe hone in on the documentary you were talking about and how portraying people coming together was so powerful. I think you feel a lot less helpless and like you have a lot more agency when you're surrounded by other people and realize that, first of all, other people care, but also that, like, okay, if it's 10 a.m. on a weekday, we're this many in this room. If you multiply that in so many spaces, you realize that the power lies in us coming together. And I think in our work with creative development and a lot of my work as a cultural programmer, I've genuinely witnessed how powerful it can be to just bring people together and talk about something. Even better if you get them to feel towards something. And yeah, I think this is where it begins, like really just putting like any space where people are coming together, just making sure that their collective consciousness is being raised towards climate. And I mean, in Egypt, I'm someone who's like very nervous about things, and I like Egypt because it feels far away from a lot of these, you know, earthquakes and fires and whatever. And we've had 3 earthquakes in the past like month. And just yesterday, our Minister of Environment was saying that we're now, shifting towards being a seismic zone and all of these things. And I, felt compelled to just make a story. And it feels so silly because I'm not going to stop the earthquake by doing that. But it's just like people aren't connecting the dots. And to link back to your, how to sell that product, I think it's about helping people connect the dots. So they're using firewood because that's what they have available. And they're not necessarily aware that, okay, 1, 2, 3, it all leads back to then the, forest or the, so being able to also just start connecting all the dots with a lot of the social justice issues that are also, important to deal with on the continent.
100%. Monique, 30 seconds.
Oh, it's just, as I said before, get on the ground, start with what you have in your hands. We could all sit here talking about what we could do, but are we doing? That's my summary.
Like that.
Yeah, I'll mirror what Monique said. I think just lead by example, man. Don't try and change the whole world, just change the world around you, lead by example, I'd say.
100%. Thank you so much. We are all Africans. We can all make this thing cool. We can all make this thing important. We must. It's time. We've run out of it. Thank you guys. Have a great day.